Hello, this is Mass talking, and I would like to talk about psychedelics and ritualism in this video. Okay, so this is something that is very misunderstood about a very old practice in terms of human civilization. Psychedelic material, organic material has been consumed by people dating back to the earliest points of recorded civilization, which as it stands right now is about 33,000 years ago. That's the oldest record we have right now that we've been able to analyze the materials, to date the materials, and see that they are going back as far as 33,000 years. That's how long human beings have been recording history and documenting, storytelling, and recording on paper. So that's an important number to think about when you feel that. So that's a really long history of human thought, civilization, and some of these oldest records are manuscripts. A lot of them are manuscripts that have been written regarding ritual and the gods of the time, religions, and practices, techniques that were used to raise energy in a ritual setting, magical techniques, meditation techniques, not only techniques, but what materials they used. Ooh. What materials they use. So that could be anything from myrrh, frankincense, and myrrh incense. It's a lot of plants that were recorded for various uses, to inspire and to quench disease in its tracks, and going on, plants that were granted to people who were undergoing an initiation rite. And this is a coming of age ritual, and it's present in cultures from various places, all over the world, places, every culture where there was people and a civilization, there's a need for marking a certain passagehood into an adult, mature point in your life, an adult phase, the adult phase. And there are myriad techniques to mark this coming of age. A very common one involved ingesting a certain plant material or organic material from the ground, from earth, a root in some cultures. I'm referring to ibogaine right there, since that is a root compound which is psychedelically active, psychoactive compound in that root. It's called ibogaine. So that's a root material. There's depictions of the mushroom form in cultures all over the world. It's one of the oldest common symbols we see in human mark making and record making. So the mushroom, the magic mushroom compound, psilocybin, being a very potent compound that is likely something that was used all over the world. And that's why we will see a lot of scripts, manuscripts, religious texts, and artworks that are thousands and thousands of years old that depict a mushroom drawing in it. So that's another thing. So there's all these organic compounds that have been utilized for a long time and associated with some area of necessity in the human psychological dimension. And by that path, the spiritual dimension, I want to bring up another compound, another plant that was depicted in early human manuscripts that had religious value and were passed on as potent sources of religious and mystical information and used by the masses, really, passed down for generations and generations. And this is a reference to the Egyptian goddess Maat, and she's depicted holding a plant, and it has 5 leaves, and she's holding it. She's holding it up like a wand or something. In some depictions, this plant has 7 leaves, so there's the 5 like a hand, and then there's 2 coming down. So there's, questions about that, and does it represent, THC plants? Does it represent, a marijuana leaf? What does it represent? It's sort of held like some kind of wand. And Ma'at, the ancient Egyptian goddess, is known as the goddess of truth and harmony. And she is the one who is holding a feather very lightly over a book full of turning pages in motion. The pages are turning, and the judged are before her, and she's the deliberator. Is this person telling the truth? Is this person deserving of a free pass, or shall we punish them? And to what severity? And she's doing this all with the delicacy that is required to fairly judge a person, a human. Humans are flawed. We're flawed. That's why we're not the gods. That is an extraordinary delicacy, to be holding a feather over turning pages and dropping it at the precise semi-second that is calling out as the truth. If the gods operate in seconds, I don't know what kind of time signature the gods are operating in. So Ma'at the goddess of truth and harmony, is depicted as holding a green plant, and it's above her head, and it's got all 5 leaves, maybe 7 at other times, and it's often conjectured that this is a mystical plant, which would not be so out of pocket, to assume that people were smoking THC infused plants, THC, cigarettes, hashish, all of these ancient uses of medicinal psychoactive compounds coming from earth materials. So this is to point out that this is long present in mystical texts that were very important to these civilizations. A lot of laws and decisions of the civilizations were relied on the people who could interpret these texts, the people who were preaching the values of these texts, and using this as a source to build social ideals and go in a new direction. Even in High England, the courts, as recent as 1700s and later, there are these courts, and the scientist, so the scientist who is to consult who the queen is to consult, the scientist who is appointed to the queen has a place in her, close to her court, her sitting area, where he has a small laboratory. They have a small laboratory. That scientist, who was keyed into all of the current technologies of the time, all of the news, the research, and all of this, who was privy to all of this potent technological necessary information, innovations that were happening at the time, was simultaneously the court magician, the court wizard, the court witch, the court mage. So even as recently as 300 years, 200, 300 years ago, the scientist was also a practitioner in the mystical arts, such as fortune telling, visioning, scrying, and astrology. All of these things were tied in to the job of being a scientist, not a mystico-scientist, scientist. That was the term that they were giving these workers, these people. So there's a long history of a correlation with medicine and mysticism, science and religion, science and the more loosely traversed areas of our world, which are the domains of the psychological, the spiritual, and what we find there with our limited human capabilities. So there's a long history of ritual being a requirement for the proper usage of psychoactive components. There's a long history of there being a correlation, and that the setting is necessary to using these substances and using them such that you are a master of them, using them masterfully. You know, you chop wood and you carry water, and you eat when you're hungry, when you're tired, you sleep. All of these mundane restrictions are necessary to using any psychoactive compound well. And this becomes apparent very quickly. It becomes apparent very quickly and transforms your understanding of social realities and other myths that abound, that are not based and are not well studied and recorded. And possibly some of these things are not meriting being recorded. Possibly some of these things are meant only to be destroyed and transformed. And I want to say something about these words, destroyed and transformed, and how ancient Egyptian writing and the earliest instance we've seen of language, written language in human history, there was a different understanding of conjugation for words. So conjugation, that's how you combine two different concepts. What do you use? And, but, to, for. There was a different understanding, and it wasn't so segmented as our languages today. In ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic writing, which is the first instance of compartmentalized concepts put on paper, it was more image-based and more phonetic in a sense. Though the words were image-based to a much higher degree at that time, the language had a structural difference compared to the languages that emerged from then and became more divested from imagery in writing. Now we put a space between every word, and we have longer spaces as opposed to prehistoric or earlier and earliest human writing, which had less spaces and gaps and more connections. It's like the difference between stone steps that are flat and wide and you walk down it, and stone steps that are shorter and taller. You still are going up the same amount of distance, but the method of getting there is going to be at a different type of balance that's required to travel the same distance. The way you balance yourself is changed. Traveling on flat, wide steps versus short, block cut steps, which is closer to how language looks today, since we've become less image-based. That's the picture I'm painting for you as an example. So ancient Egyptian writing, the first written source of language, was less segmented. There wasn't I, you, me. It was more connecting what was present to what you wanted the object to move towards. So now we do subject, predicate, subject, object. It was more object, object. Subjectivity, that's when you say I, me. And this is why there's so much selfishness, vanity, privilege in a way that is so concentrated on the individual and possessions. Since that time, we've sort of shifted in 33,000 years, after certain key innovations, we've sort of passed by a turning point technologically since moving to more text-based interaction and realities, social methods. We've become increasingly personalized and subjective. Subjective is when you put an object that is led by a subject, and the subject has the power. The subject is leading the object, right? The subject is there. There wasn't a subject before. It was objects and object relations. So we've put ourselves into this matrix and formed matrices around it, which wasn't present before. So that's relevant in this circumstance. It's relevant to say that language itself has become restructured, and so it has influenced, or it's better to say it this way, you need to say it this way, language can be influenced by structure. Language will be influenced by structure. So anyone who is using an incorrect structure, and no, I'm not talking about different dialects. I'm not talking about the very, archaic, the stringent rules about how it needs to be in the most proper usage of such and such language. I'm talking about genuinely not speaking coherently and starting to misuse language so that it becomes all about you, the subject, and you're not appeasing to the object. So you stop being objective. It becomes about your personal life, your personal problems, and it has no relevance in the matter, the current matter that's at the table, the world. It's all in your head, and it's not communicative. It's not social. It's not something that can be traded with and conversed with. It cannot be crossed with to produce electricity. It's not gonna work. It's not gonna work. So that's something to think about. If you're not building your language, it's falling on itself. And it has everything to do with how we've become more personalized. And that's the proof. The oldest written language didn't have I. It didn't have I. I and I will survive.